Hi again, Leo Demetrio here from Let It Spin. And joining me again today, music guru, Mr. Martin Fawkes.
Hello there, Leo.
And 45 RPM radio show presenter, Mr. Wes J.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hey. Thanks for checking us out. Today we'll be looking at the music phenomenon that is Thin Lizzy. And a new 3-disc set has been released. There it is right there. And Wes has it as well.
Yeah. It's in the post.
Excellent. Perfect. So disc 1 features a documentary of lead singer Phil Lynott, which is brilliantly produced. It contains interviews with those close to Phil, highlighting what an amazing songwriter and performer he was. A must-see, in my opinion. And the other 2 discs feature Thin Lizzy live at the Sydney Opera House back in October 1978, both on DVD and CD. And of course, I was lucky enough to be amongst that massive throng that day, and to relive the experience was absolutely fantastic. The sound quality is surprisingly superb, and although I couldn't find myself in the multitude of the audience crosses, I found the entire performance utterly satisfying. And this concert would be a fantastic entry point for those who want to check out the band for the first time. This is a cool release, and the songs still sound fresh today and are well worth repeated spins on both formats. Martin, what's your take on Thin Lizzy?
I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Thin Lizzy. Probably the first time I ever saw them visually, Rod Stewart had released his album A Night on the Town, and he'd made a television special, which was basically him in a studio wearing his satin shirt and satin pants and gyrating and miming to A Night on the Town songs. But Thin Lizzy were the special guests, and I was my mind blown just to see Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson with their harmony guitars doing guitar duels, and just the intensity and the excitement. Bit of a contrast to Rod's album, which was very top heavy with ballads, lots of ballads on that record. So I got into Boys Are Back in Town and the Jailbreak record, full of absolute gems on that record. And then the live album,
Live and Dangerous.
Live and Dangerous. Live and Dangerous. And again, TV shows like Night Moves would show clips from that as well, and just seeing the interplay between the 2 lead guitarists, which was a novelty to my mind. Of course, there are groups in America like the Allman Brothers Band and a lot of those southern rock bands, and even in the UK, Wishbone Ash had been doing something kind of similar, not exactly the same. But as you're saying, Phil Lynott's lyrical content, and I didn't realise at the time just how much historical information he was portraying in a lot of his lyrics as well. So, yeah, I loved him.
Fantastic. Wes, what about you? What's your take?
My take on Thin Lizzy is, growing up in the 70s, I was aware of them, but they weren't one of my peak bands. They were kind of like, yeah, they were there, but I probably was more interested in what was happening in chart music, and at least on the single stuff. So there really wasn't a lot of stuff happening for them. And that was partially because Australian radio in the 1970s and 80s basically was bereft of rock music, and so a lot of music was not being played on commercial radio. And even in terms of sales, as much as there is just absolutely mastery with the music of Thin Lizzy, I can't find any ARIA accreditations at all, or even any references prior to that for sales that achieved gold or platinum status. Now, that might be because the stuff happened before ARIA, but I think it would have been reflected later in compilations and the like. It's like, for example, when I look through their chart history, Black Rose, for example, it was a great album of rock. That's the Black Rose Rock Legend in 1979. That went to #2 in Australia. Thunder and Lightning went to #4. That was 1983, I think. And Bad Reputation, it also went to #4 in 1977. So they're the key top 10 albums for Thin Lizzy.
Mm.
And in terms of singles, well, there was Whiskey in a Jar, and that reached #40. That's a national figure. And The Boys Are Back in Town, the figure that they reached was #56 in 1976. However, most of the airplay for The Boys Are Back in Town came 2 years later. And in New South Wales, for example, it reached, this is in 1978, possibly around as a result of the video stuff that was being, the concert that was then shown on TV. That reached #40 in New South Wales, but sadly for 1 week. But the other singles were, well, I know you can argue with me and say they weren't a singles band, and that's a pretty fair comment. But
I do have a question.
Hmm?
I do have a question. In Geelong and Melbourne, which were my territory, Dancing in the Moonlight from the Bad Reputation album was big. And it seemed like their attempt to do a pop song as well. So it's playful lyrics. Huey Lewis, I think, playing harmonica on it from Huey Lewis and the News. So was that not a national hit?
No.
So from what you're saying, it wasn't national. So it might have just been in Victoria.
That's my understanding from the research that I did of various charts.
Now, can I reflect to you that
please,
what you're saying about their lack of chart activity as far as singles goes, scuttlebutt that I heard, and I might have read it in Ram magazine or Duke magazine, so I don't know if it's true, but I had read that at the time of the 2SM Rocktober concert, which is the framework for this this DVD re-release, remaster, that when it came time to actually stage the show, Waku, who did have a top 10 hit in Australia with You're Such a Fabulous Dancer, so they were also on the bill, and the manager of Waku and the manager of Thin Lizzy were at it hammer and tongs over who should headline, because Waku had a top 10 hit, whereas Thin Lizzy weren't a charting singles band, really. Now, of course, for me, it would have been, in 1978, I would have been 17 years old, and I'm like, what's the argument? Thin Lizzy have more credibility, of course. They've been around for years. They've got several albums out.
Yeah.
Waku, who's heard of Waku apart from this one song? And lucky for us, Thin Lizzy won the day, and unlucky for Waku, nobody ever heard from them in Australia again.
Oh, they might have been a fabulous dancer, but that's all.
It was a fabulous song, but very Queen influenced in some respects. But I just felt that was fascinating that the managers were actually trotting out these statistics to say, well, we've had higher chart placement, so this 100,000 people are more likely to be here to see us than to see you. I don't know if tossed a coin, I don't know.
Yeah. I think that Thin Lizzy musically just nailed it in this show. Yeah. Do you guys want to talk about the show that we saw?
Well, they had two sub guys in there. So Thin Lizzy had always been relatively volatile, as in they started off with Eric Bell on lead guitar and Phil Lynott, obviously singer, songwriter, bass player, and Brian Downey on drums. And Eric Bell was like, look, I need to feed my family, I need to pay the bills. So he quit the band, and I think he also wasn't too happy with them trying to become more of a hard rock band. And so he left the band relatively early, and Gary Moore had an earlier stint in the band and recorded some songs on the Nightlife album. But they really found their mettle when they brought in the American guitar player Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson sharing lead guitar duties. And by the time of this concert, Brian Robertson had been in and out of the band, and Gary Moore was brought in as a substitute and actually stuck around for a little bit. But the drummer, Brian Downey, had to sit out the tour for health reasons or whatever it was. And Mark Nosif, I hope I'm pronouncing the name properly, late of the Ian Gillan band, of course, Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. So Mark Nosif had sat in with the band. So the actual internal rhythms, if I can put it that way, when you've got four people on a stage and you have four individual points of view and ways of living life, and you have to find a harmony and a way to lock together. So you'll find that the drummer being different and Gary Moore bringing a lot of aggression and attitude with him. But this is probably a version of Thin Lizzy that its energy was a little bit different than when Brian Downey and Brian Robertson were actually in the band.
Musicianship is amazing,
Oh, for sure.
to be honest with you. And I think while I didn't see the show at all, in other words, I didn't attend the show, my recollection is that this appeared on television maybe a week or a month after the show at the Opera House. And in looking back at it now, I go, wow, the sound is excellent for the most part. There's a few spots where it's not so great, but the sound overall is really clear. And however, I think we should explain that it's a DVD of the concert and not a Blu-ray of the concert. And what that means, it's really got low res in comparison, say, to the high res, which is on the documentary. And the low res is like watching an old television video.
Well, let's face facts. Effectively, it was your local radio station who putting on a show for 100,000 people. Right? Yeah. It's like, so the budget would not have been, I'm assuming they didn't expect quite so many people, but
it was
the budget wouldn't have been through the roof. No. You know, the days of multi-million-dollar, tens of millions of dollar turnover FM stations, this is way prior to that, if I'm correct. And yes. So the idea of high res and lots of cameras and that this was going to be a historical document probably didn't occur to the people who were funding it. In Melbourne, there was 3XY, and in Sydney, 2SM, and they would do their Rocktober concerts every year, and they would hitch on the back of other touring acts. And I remember in Melbourne, Status Quo and Uriah Heep coming, and maybe Black Sabbath one year, were co-promoted as Rocktober concerts. And so this one, I think, was an attempt to do something that stood alone as value to the radio station itself, co-branding, rather than a tour in its own right. And so they came in specifically for this event. Who would have thought that, how many years later, 44 years later, that it was going to be a historical document, and we're all going to be looking back at it with wonder at just how tight and powerful this band really were.
Yeah, and you're right about the power. This concert, as you can see there was a lot of crosses to the audience on the DVD, and the audience is going off right throughout this performance, and the energy is full on. We were just pulsating the whole way through that performance by Thin Lizzy. It's so enjoyable, and it does indicate how amazing the energy was of this particular concert.
Where in the crowd were you?
I think I'm about there somewhere. No, I was actually looking for myself every time they crossed to the audience, but unfortunately I can't fully remember exactly where I was, but amazing concert and an amazing day, that one. An interesting fact though, I didn't follow up and getting into Thin Lizzy the way I probably should have after watching that.
Hmm.
And it's only now that I'm actually going back and exploring their albums fresh, and they are magnificent. Even apart from the live stuff, their studio stuff is really good too, and powerful and energetic and worth listening to.
So did you go to the event because of Thin Lizzy or because it was 2SM?
Well, I went to a few of these concerts with my friends back in the day when we were living in Sydney. I think it was because of Thin Lizzy, because The Boys Are Back in Town was a massive hit, and yeah,
It felt like a massive hit.
well, it felt like it, yeah. It felt like a massive hit. It wasn't huge, but we all knew how catchy it was, and it got airplay on 2SM.
Yeah.
But Thin Lizzy were a draw card back, as I recall, when they came out, and we went and we were part of the action, and it was fully satisfying.
Look, in those days, it was a bit harder to acknowledge that we actually secretly did like ABBA. So, and Thin Lizzy felt like they were talking our language.
Yeah, exactly. Great rock show, that one, and totally recommend people to get into Thin Lizzy via this to start with, and then explore their back catalogue. I mean, there's a lot of streaming outlets out there that you can listen to their stuff, and it's available. And I would recommend going into it, maybe Jailbreak to start with, and then moving on to the others.
Hmm.
Fantastic songwriter, Phil Lynott.
Yep.
Just getting into his lyrics, very poetic and brilliant. I like the way he puts together his words, and
For sure.
and the music complements it beautifully. Well, as a result of this, why not do our top 3 Thin Lizzy songs? We have to do a ranking, don't we, each time? So let's start with our number 3 song, and we can start with Martin.
Sure, I'm going to go to their pop hit, Dancing in the Moonlight. So again, he's telling the story of a young man on his first date and how nervous he is, and a drummer I used to work with misheard some of the lyrics. So he talks in the song. He talks about going to the cinema, and he hates how he gets chocolate stains on his pants. And my drummer thought that he was saying that he was so nervous he was getting chocolate stains in his pants.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, Roger. No, I don't think so. I think it was altogether more innocent than that one. So let's leave that one.
Where's your number 3?
Same.
The same.
Yeah. Dancing in the Moonlight. It caught me in its spotlight.
It's all right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Number 3. Kind of, I'm a singles boy, so I'm going to concentrate on the singles, I guess. And it doesn't mean that's because I haven't explored the rest, but I'm going, hey, these are the most accessible songs, or the singles were the most accessible songs and still are. And I guess the era of the 70s and 80s and 90s, and even the users, has primarily just been singles orientated. And then there are others who've gone and spent all their time just checking out the wonderful stuff related to the albums. But for me, number 3, Dancing in the Moonlight.
Yep, and my number 3 is the title track of the Bad Reputation album. Back in 1977, as Martin mentioned, released on the 2nd of September. What a great rock song. I can't get enough of that. Brilliant. It's just got that energy, and that's what I like about Thin Lizzy. It makes you want to, it just makes you happy and wanting to, you know, just rock for the rest of the day. So Bad Reputation's my number 3. Martin, your number 2?
Well, I'm going to go back to the song that I saw them playing on that Rod Stewart TV special, which was Emerald from the Jailbreak album. Just, you know, as a tale of a historic battle. And as part of the prosody of that, or the unpacking of it musically to illustrate what the lyrics are saying, the guitar duel between Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson, just the battling guitars, where one would play a furious little solo and then the other one would respond and elevate the energy, and then the next guy would come back and more energy again. And yeah, incredible.
Okay. Where's your number 2?
I'm going to go with the single that I first became aware of them with. Is that English? But no, it's not. It's Irish. And therefore it's Whiskey in the Jar. And that was really a story of a high woman. And so I kind of like that.
Cool.
Metallica did a cover of that one, which is worth checking out, really worth checking out.
Okay.
Cool. And my number 2, I agree with Martin. My number 2 is also Emerald, that epic and closing track from the Jailbreak album from back in 1976. Everything that Martin said, I echo, and what a great song. What a fantastic song.
Yeah.
Martin, you're number 1.
From the Johnny the Fox album, which I didn't really get into the album particularly, but I absorbed this song through the years from it being in the air, like whether it was movie soundtracks or somehow I absorbed this song from other sources and hearing it on the radio. And that's a song that Gary Moore did his own version of as a solo artist later on, and that's Don't Believe a Word. Just the charging guitars and the energy of the thing. Gary Moore, when he did his version, he started it as a ballad and portrayed the core of the song as a ballad, and then sped it up into tempo of the Thin Lizzy version to close. And yeah, proving the versatility of good songwriting.
Cool. Where's your number 1?
Oh, come on. This is so predictable, isn't it, for me? Come on. The boys are back in town. Yeah, come on. Let's want to see it. Interesting thing about it is there 3 versions of this song by Thin Lizzy that were released as singles. There's a version which is 3 minutes 11, and that's probably the most common. There's another version which is 4 minutes and 53 seconds.
Oh.
But strangely enough, the album is only 4.5 minutes. So in other words, there's I don't know, it's one of these cases where single versions are often longer than the album cut. There you go.
I did hear a version of that at the end of a movie I was watching, which is a different version again. So different guitar harmonies in the back half of the song. So yeah. There's a 4th version, at least a 4th version. Well, maybe mixed specifically for the film.
For the movies, of course. And it's been used in Toy Story and Toy Story 2 and Rick and Morty's, Detroit Rock City, and the Saints Row, Saints Row number 4.
Cool. Such a great, catchy rock song. And speaking of catchy, my number 1 is probably the catchiest track that I've heard of Thin Lizzy from 1979's Black Rose album. It was released as a 45 Wes. It's Waiting for an Alibi. And that is such a, it's sort of a new wavy, I guess you might call it. They sort of jumped on that bandwagon a bit. Not sure whether you guys agree, but I couldn't get enough of that particular song. Even today, it still ranks up there as number 1 for me. Waiting for an Alibi, Thin Lizzy. Any other notable things that you guys want to mention regarding their stuff? Or
Sure. I picked up a DVD, it must have been 10 years ago or so. Gary Moore did a tribute, section of one of his concerts as a tribute to Phil Lynott. And he brought back Eric Bell from the first version of the band. He brought back Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson. And so in combination with his own band, and I think Brian Downey may have been playing with the Gary Moore band at the time. So he brought these other guitarists in as guests to perform Thin Lizzy songs written by Phil Lynott as a tribute to Phil. And well worth tracking down. Unfortunately, the actual team of Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson aren't paired together on that video. It's Gary teaming with the guest guitarist, and there's a documentary video with that as well. Well worth sussing out if you're a Thin Lizzy fan. And of course, the live album, Live and Dangerous, an absolute classic. And if you want a greatest hits, great way to get them.
cool. Awesome. Are we done, boys?
Yeah, we're done.
I think we're done. Thanks,
Well,
Leo.
thanks for checking
Les.
us out. Please check out the link to where you can find the latest 45 RPM program, as well as the previous shows that Wes hosts. Please add your comment by letting us know your thoughts on the Opera House concert and by highlighting your top 3 Thin Lizzy records. Hope you enjoyed today's offering. If so, would love it if you can give us a thumbs up and to subscribe to Let It Spin. We'll see you next time.
We'll be back in town soon.
Oh, I like it.